Morning, everyone. So I'd like to welcome all of you to the 7th annual ASC Connect. My name is Samir Sabharwal. I'm the Executive Director at the Alberta Securities Commission, and I want to thank all of you for joining us today. We're pleased to once again host our conference in person. It's nice to be able to come together physically in one space to connect and learn from each other. This one-of-a-kind event enables us to welcome Albertans, and indeed some of our fellow Canadians, from a variety of industries and sectors to discuss important topics that are influencing our capital market. I hope you will find it a positive experience, and at the end of the day, you'll come away feeling more informed and hopefully inspired about what is possible for Alberta. Before we start, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that Stampede Park is near the confluence of the Bow and Elbow rivers. This historic land is important to all Indigenous communities, which is why they come together to celebrate their culture here during the Calgary Stampede each July. This land is the traditional territories of the Indigenous peoples of the Treaty 7 region and Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. Like all of you, I respect the histories, languages, and cultures of all First Peoples of Canada, whose presence continues to enrich our communities. Alberta's capital market continues to be one of the most important in Canada, and its participants come from a variety of industries: agriculture, energy, financial services, and technology, to name just a few. They all play a notable role in our economy and the economy of Canada. Our capital market continues to be influenced by a number of issues and trends, as well as presenting potential opportunities. These include evolving investor priorities, economic uncertainty, environmental, social, and governance considerations, the global demand for energy, including clean energy, and climate change. We consistently monitor these issues and consider the implications for our market. We do this because our aim is to protect investors and foster a strong capital market that facilitates economic growth for Albertans. And we take a thoughtful, collaborative approach to creating practical, intelligent regulation. We'll be discussing a number of these topics today, all in the context of our thematic focus: economic growth, innovation, and intelligent regulation. All of the speeches and panel discussions will take place in this room, which is Hall B. We've planned thoughtful conversations and invited notable leaders and industry experts to present their bold perspectives on this stage today. I'm very pleased to invite to the stage our first panel of the day to discuss harmonizing intelligent regulation. Please welcome Stan Magidson from the Alberta Securities Commission, who is also currently the chair of the Canadian Securities Administrators, Brenda Leong from the British Columbia Securities Commission, Éric Jacob from Quebec's AMF, and Grant Vingoe from the Ontario Securities Commission. We're very fortunate to have each of you with us, and I'd like to welcome you to ASC Connect. Stan, the floor is yours.
Well, thanks, Samir, and how wonderful is it to be back here together in person. Really welcome everybody, and looking forward to our first panel conversation, which is going to be a panel that really talks about the CSA, the Canadian Securities Administrators. And, you know, I suspect a number of you know certainly about the Alberta Securities Commission, the ASC, and what we do, but you probably also are aware of all these references frequently that you see to the CSA or what the Canadian Securities Administrators do or don't do. And we actually thought this could be a terrific opportunity to better socialize and talk about what we actually achieve at the CSA, what we're all about. And I can't think of a better way of doing that than having with me on stage this morning. Really, it's terrific representation of, and I'll just go kind of to my immediate left to right here. Éric Jacob from the AMF in Quebec, You may know that there was a recently appointed new president of the AMF, Yves Ouellet, but he's not able to attend, but we know that Éric will be an extremely capable spokesperson for the AMF. He's very effective and participatory within the CSA, so welcome, Éric, and thanks for making the trip out. To Éric's left, Brenda Leong, the chair of the British Columbia Securities Commission, and to Brenda's left, Grand Vingoe, chair of the OSC. And again, thanks all for coming out for this. And I think this is a great opportunity to kind of understand what it is we actually try and achieve through the CSA. This is the first time, I believe, we have in Alberta brought together effectively the chairs or CEOs of the 4 leading jurisdictions in securities regulation in the country. So I hope you find this informative and interesting. And in that context, I'm going to get right into it with my first question for the panel. Brenda, don't take this personally. You've been, I think, the longest serving member as a chair chief executive of our respective commissions. You've seen a lot at the CSA over the years, and I'd really appreciate if you could perhaps share with the audience your thoughts on really about how the CSA actually works, what makes it unique and effective.
Well, it's great. First, it's great to be here at the Big Four. I grew up in Calgary, so it's my hometown. So it's always really a pleasure to come back and visit. I'm going to try and make this not boring, because I think a lot of people think regulation is boring, but nothing could be further from the truth. So when we talk about the CSA, I would be hard-pressed to think of another organization in this country that operates like the CSA. If you go to our website, we describe ourselves as an umbrella group. And that's true as far as it goes. We are an umbrella group because we're not a legal entity. We're not a single national regulator. But that really doesn't do justice to what the CSA is. We collectively work together, Stan, Éric, myself, Grant. We come together regularly. We meet bi-weekly. We come together in person several times a year to discuss and exchange ideas and develop rules for the Canadian capital markets. And, it's a lot of people would say, you've heard people talk about Canada's system of regulation as being a patchwork system. And I also think that's a misleading way to describe Canada's system, because if you think about the rules, and those of you who operate in our capital markets, you will know that one of the aims of securities regulators in this country is to, in fact, strive for harmonized national rules that will facilitate capital raising across this country. And so when we say it's a patchwork, it's not really a patchwork, because we've got hundreds of staff who work collaboratively across the country. They come together and they work hard to try and create a network of rules that are seamless across the country. Do we achieve that all the time? I'd say for the most part. If you look at the rule book from British Columbia right through to the Maritimes, the rules are the same. And to the extent that they might be different from time to time, it's often because the legislative framework drives those, or sometimes there may be local priorities that require differences in the legislation. Now, one of the things that I will say is, people will say it's not a great system because you've got all these different regulators. And again, I think it's misleading to say that. We do work hard. Is it a perfect system? No, it isn't perfect. But point out a perfect system to me. There isn't one, and we're often compared to other developed economies in the world, the United States, as an example, where they have the SEC. But in fact, in the United States, you have the SEC, and you have 52 state regulators. And we're a member of another organization on those 52 state regulators. So we also work with the state regulators. Okay, sorry, I think I lost my mic there. To try and harmonize rules for companies that are operating cross-border as well. So I think one of the things that people will talk about is you're bringing differences to the table. And I don't think that's a weakness in my view. You know, I may be a bit biased, but it isn't a weakness. I think it actually brings more rigor to the discussions. It forces us, all of us, to really think through the issues affecting our capital markets more thoughtfully, more deeply, to try and reach a consensus. And it's through that kind of debate and discussion, which is healthy, that I think drives better policy making for this country. So in a nutshell, Stan, that's kind of what the CSA is. And you know, when you think about some of the areas that we've tackled over the years, so I'll just name a few, you know, client-focused reforms, banning deferred sales charges for mutual funds. More recently, developing a regulatory framework for crypto asset trading platforms. We've done that all together. Has it been difficult to get there? Sometimes it has, because we've brought disparate views to the table, and we've debated them, and we've researched them, and we've consulted with you on them. But at the end of the day, we managed to get across the finish line. And you know, I would say that's quite that would be an accomplishment for a single regulator. The fact that we did that collaboratively, I think, is really impressive. And I think that's something that I think you out there, when you hear people being critical of the Canadian system, I think there's opportunities to actually defend it.
Well, thanks, Brenda. And maybe just to pick up on that, Grant, you know, we recently published at the CSA a year in review, and I think that publication had a lot of content about what it is we're actually focused on and we are achieving. I'm wondering if you might just share with the audience, you know, your thoughts a little bit more concretely on what are the things that we're actually focused on, using that as a bit of a touchstone, if you like.
Yeah, I'd say it's a great document. It combined our enforcement report and our traditional year-in review analysis published in September. So I really urge people to take a look at it. You know, it really demonstrates across so many different sectors how we're working together. And Brenda described the leadership meetings, but our staff, the staff of each organization, are working in committees day in and day out on policy and also operational matters. So it's a very intensive, continuous development. But you know, we're grappling with very significant issues, whether it's ESG related issues on climate disclosure that were you know, based in part on the work that's being done internationally with the international effort on climate, the ISSB. We're also spending a lot of time as well trying to reconcile, you know, significant regional differences in the approach to diversity disclosure. So those are, you know, just two examples of very, you know, high level, very impactful areas where we and our respective staffs are working together to reconcile differences, to air differences, and frankly have the confidence to have debate in order to you know, seek a harmonized solution. But it goes, you know, far beyond that in areas like total cost reporting, which will benefit investors through, you know, more impactful information about the costs that they're bearing. It was a true, national exercise led by the AMF in which we all participated, or the work that we're doing on investor redress to strengthen the ability of retail investors to receive compensation when mistakes have been made and firms or their representatives haven't engaged in appropriate behavior. So, the report expresses the different themes that we're involved in, everything from investor protection, like the investor redress one I described, disclosure initiatives, continuous work in the M&A sector, so we're all coordinated, and in enforcement. And I think the challenge for us, especially for those of us who were participating in the effort to create a national regulator, is to ensure that that now that that's off the table, paused off the table, that we in the CSA demonstrate that we can function effectively, seamlessly, and achieve effective results in the absence of an institutional change like that. And I think we're demonstrating that day in and day out. And frankly, if there was a national regulator, I would hope that these intense debates would have happened within the organization itself. So, to those who, say that Canada is behind the times by not having a national regulator, I don't think that truly reflects an understanding of how policy is formulated and how different opinions, views, research are incorporated into the outcome. Whether it's in a single entity or a collaborative entity across the country, you need debate, you need the difference of opinion, and you come out stronger as a result of that. I think all regulatory bodies across the country could benefit from a model like the CSA, which has worked very effectively. We should also be critical of ourselves. I think we can increase our agility and responsiveness. I also think we can increase our cooperative efforts and enforcement to have a harder and more effective enforcement regime to back up what we're saying in our policy discussions. But so we have to be both self-critical, but also extol the strengths. And also I'd say the essential, in Canada, the essential nature of an organization like the CSA that can operate on a consensus basis and in a very cooperative basis without everyone going into their own corners.
Thanks for that, Grant. Éric, was there anything you wanted to add into that mix? If not, I've got something else cooking for you, but
Can I just
how would you
ask one
like
thing?
to go?
You go, and then I just had one comment.
Okay. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to, when Grant said that, sometimes we have to be self-critical, we have to look and say, can we do better? Well, a great example, a most recent example, and we might talk about it this morning, Stan, is on crypto. Everybody talks about crypto. Everybody loves to talk about crypto.
That's true.
We came together really fast in a moving dynamic area. As crypto was unfolding and exploding and all the drama that was happening, mostly in the United States, we came together really quickly, and Canada is one of the leading countries in the world that has developed a regulatory framework around crypto asset trading. And so that's quite remarkable when you think about what we just described, a system of regulation where people are collaboratively working together from country, tip to toe.
Agreed.
Thanks for that, Brenda.
I would just add maybe, and I agree with what you're saying, is the ability to speak from a national voice, but having the provincial and more local specificities around the table in reality. So I think this is really a strong model in my perspective.
I will share a quick anecdote with you. Maybe some of you have heard this before, but when I first joined the CSA and the ASC, I was going to my first meeting of the chief executives, and I got the agenda and materials, there were 7 items on the agenda, and they said, we're going to allot a day and a half to the discussion. And I looked at the 7 issues, and I said, well, surely we could do this in 1 hour. 7 issues, about 8 minutes each, allow 2 minutes for discussion, we're done. And I thought I knew all the answers. I went to my first meeting, really revved up to go contribute. First agenda item, I spoke and I said, well, surely we should do this. And then this is not a completely accurate depiction, but I think BC said, well, Stan, did you think about that? And then Quebec said, well, what about this? And Ontario said, what about that? And you know what? I stepped back and I said, wow, I didn't think about that. And what we were all bringing to the table were our best views on what the right answers were. And it was a very healthy discussion. It's a very respectful discussion. And I would say, for the criticisms about how it's so difficult to get the consensus, if something comes out of the CSA rinse cycle, it's a clean product. And I really think that has stood the test of time. And I would put our regulatory system up against anyone in the world in terms of how we are regulating capital markets in Canada. And I wouldn't be embarrassed to say that if you look at this objectively, I think we're doing reasonably well. Now that's for your judgment, not ours, but something to think about. With that said, Éric, in addition to developing policy entre nous, we also are very mindful to make sure we're tapping into stakeholders for input in terms of policy creation, formation, rulemaking. Could you speak a bit to that, how we engage with third parties?
Certainly, I have, of course, a few examples come to mind, but before, what I'd like to say in my perspective, CSA certainly has a strong culture of consulting with stakeholders, whether you're from industry, advocates, fellow regulators, investors, etc. I think CSA certainly has that strong culture. That being said, and maybe as an example, maybe about a year ago, CSA announced the establishment of an investor advisory panel. The mandate of that panel is to represent the interests of retail investors in Canada. Of course, the members of this panel the members of the panels are from diverse background, and not just geographically, because we're covering all Canada, but also from socio-demographic factors, experience, personal attributes, and so on. So that the panel, of course, is a direct contributor in the policy work of the CSA, as they have their input and they advise us at the very early stages of our work, all the way through subsequent phases of the policy development. So it is very important to the CSA, and I have to say, and this is important as well, the panel is independent. So the members choose the topics or the subjects which they want to advise the CSA on. So a very good contributor as a stakeholder to the CSA in their policy work and rulemaking initiatives. Another great example for me that I could think of is the total cost reporting project. In April 2023, so last April, CSA published enhancements on cost disclosure reporting requirements for investment funds. And the publication, of course, was the outcome of a long and extensive consultation process in policy development program. And that consultation process took about over 8 years, so there's a lot of consultation that was made there. We consulted with, of course, industry stakeholders, investors, advocates, dealers, advisors, ETF fund managers, all the way to third-party service providers. We even had a roundtable with executive level discussion with industry and investors at Financial Market Regulators Joint Forum in 2021 and in 2022. All that to say, we were able to understand the issues and the realities of the market. So we received a lot of feedback on those proposals, and I think the end result, the final publication, showed that we did really listen. So we listened, and it showed that really an improved. And as Stan was saying, once it goes through the rinse cycle, I think it's pretty clean out there. So in a nutshell, for me, the stakeholders' feedback, the stakeholders' consultations that we have, the contribution of stakeholders is key to all the CSA policy and rulemaking work that we're doing. So very important to us.
Thanks, Éric. Anything you'd like to add on this one?
Well, I was just going to say that I echo what Éric's saying, is the input that we get from you in the capital markets is truly vital, actually, to great policy making in this country, because as much as we reach out and try to understand the issues, you're on the ground day to day, you're doing the deals, you're running into the challenges that you are, and to the extent that the more we hear about those, it makes for smarter, better regulation for this country to enable market participants to operate. And, you know, in addition to the formal consultations that Éric described, where, you know, we'll go out and have roundtables and invite comments in, it's forums like this. So it's really, really terrific, Stan, that you bring industry people together, because it's forums like this that also are an opportunity to exchange ideas and for you to speak to your colleagues here at the ASC to give them ideas about what's working, what's not working.
Thanks, Brenda. Grant, anything to add?
Well, in Ontario, we have a statutory mandate to conduct a cost-benefit analysis. So, you know, the comment letters and the consultations that we engage in are definitely on the merits of the policy. The challenge is, you know, trying to get regulation to be proportionate, not overly burdensome, you know, defining the problem appropriately, and stakeholders help us do that. But in our case, and I think the entire CSA benefits from the comments that we get on cost-benefit, that's a great opportunity to provide really concrete input. And I think it's an area where we can work together even more on that, stakeholders and the CSA. You know, for competitive reasons sometimes, or because it's difficult, and it is difficult, we find that a lot of the quantitative information about burden isn't always provided. So like an area for improvement in stakeholder consultation, a two-way street, is to get much more, you know, direct cost-benefit analysis. So if we're told, for example, on total cost reporting that it's going to cost $100 million, you know, it's necessary to have a breakdown, and trust us with that information. Our output as policymakers will be better when we get that, you know, very concrete, granular information to support positions. So we're well down that path. It's working well, but I'm really calling for the entire community to do an even better job in providing us with that type of quantitative input.
Thanks, Grant. Just a reminder to the audience, there will be time for Q&A, so please, I think, refer back to Samir's comments about there's a way to get questions up to us here at the panel. If you have a question, please go through that process and they'll get up to me. I don't know that we'll get to all of them, but now would be a good time to get started so that we could try and take some of those at the end of this session. I'd now like to shift gears just a little bit and kind of rather than be at the 40,000 foot level, start to look a little more at some of the initiatives that I think we've worked on that warrant some further elaboration. So, Brenda, you did refer to client-focused reforms. I'm not sure everybody in the room knows what that means. We tend to get pretty hooked into our own speak here at the CSA, but could you just talk a little bit about that project and where we're at now on it?
Yeah. Yeah, so I'll try and break that down to something that means something to you. Client-focused reforms. In a nutshell, back in the '08 crisis, there was actually a crisis of confidence on the part of investors. And I think regulators around the world were assessing whether or not the regulatory framework that governed the conduct, the sales practices of dealers and advisors was at the level where it should be. There's inherent conflicts in the system, we all understand that, but whether or not the standards needed to be raised in order to serve the interests of investors better. And so that's what we talk about when we talk about it being client-focused. And at the time, in many jurisdictions, including in the United States, there was significant debate about how do you raise that bar? How do you raise that standard of conduct? There were different approaches being discussed. One of them was a best interest standard, a regulatory best interest standard that you would impose on dealers at all levels. A different approach that was brought to the table in our discussions, we said, well, you know, is that going to be hard to actually regulate? Because what does it mean to have a regulatory best standard? And it wasn't to say that one was right or wrong, but what we said was, we broke it down and we said, where is it that advisors and firms might be failing the investor or might be able to serve the investor better? So we looked more closely at those areas like conflict of interest, putting your client's interests first. And we thought the better approach, after much debate, and this is another area where we went out, we did a lot of consultation, probably 2 rounds on, do you go with a best interest standard, or do you go with what we called the client-focused reforms, which was to look at the real areas where there were problems and change the rules or enhance the rules to ensure the client's interests were put first. And so at the end of all of that debate, we did arrive with harmonized, what we call client-focused reforms that really embed best interest concepts into the specific pieces of regulatory requirements imposed on dealers and firms. Is it working? We don't know yet. We collaboratively, again, with our SRO partners, it was IROC at the time and the MFDA, we went out and we did a nationwide compliance review to test whether or not firms were actually complying with the new standards. And what we found is, you know, they're getting there. Are we there yet? We're not there yet. But some firms are doing a pretty darn good job. They understand it. Others, they still need to pick up the pace here. And so we're working hand in hand with the industry to try and help them implement the rules and to breathe life into what we really intended.
Thanks, Brenda. You know, just one other initiative maybe I could talk about, and we're going to actually in our next panel really peel the onion on that much more, but it's the setting up of CIRO, the Canadian Investment Regulatory Organization. And you'll hear a lot more about that in the next session, but in a nutshell, there was, I think, a real sense that we should be thinking about, do we really need 2 separate self-regulatory organizations, one regulating mutual fund dealers, the other investment dealers? And just a quick illustration of that would be, why is it that you could not buy an ETF from a mutual fund dealer, given that these products were becoming quite fungible? And I think there was a lot of discussion and consideration about whether or not it was timely to now think about putting these two organizations together. And you'll hear more about this, but essentially, I think it was August of 2021, that there was a decision taken to actually proceed after extensive consultation. And 3 months later, CSA, working with both MFD and IROC, indicated we were going to get this done by year-end 2022, so December 31, 2022, which is about a year to get the amalgamation done. And I know for some of you who are M&A lawyers, getting deals done these days in a year is not necessarily the current MO. And when you start to combine that with huge regulatory implications that had to be worked through, I'd like to say that actually this is an illustration of how CSA can actually move quickly when there's a prioritization given to a project. And you'll hear much more about that in the next panel. Maybe another area that we are going to talk a lot more about in today's session is, and Grant alluded to it, the whole ESG area. I think it's fair to say that investors increasingly are asking for more disclosure and information relating to, call it corporate Canada's approach to environmental, social, and governance issues. And these trends are both domestic and they're international. And you'll be hearing a lot more about how in this area, and we have Charles-Antoine Saint-Jean here from the CSSB with us, this is an area where we now in Canada are very actively focused on what should we do here in Canada in light of these national and international developments. And two projects in particular that I'll mention that are very current and still works in process are, the first one's on diversity. So in that regard, you'll likely know that CSA did put out a consultation, and the comment period actually closed recently, September 29th. And on that one, I think there's clearly consensus within the CSA that we wanted to advance diversity disclosure beyond purely gender considerations and consider broader diversity. The proposals would not in any way change what we're proposing to do in relation to disclosure for women on boards, or executive officer positions, but was really testing how best can we further enhance disclosure on diversity beyond gender. And in that regard, we at CSA, and this is an indication of the debate and discussion we have, we couldn't come internally into a singular view as to the best approach to disclosure. So we went out with kind of dual proposals, which I think people are quite familiar with. What's come back is about 75 comment letters. You'll appreciate this just closed on the 29th of September. We believe there's incredible interest in this space, very thoughtful responses written, and now what we'll have to do, I think, at CSA is carefully reflect on all of the feedback received, and then ultimately, I guess, it will be up to CSA through conversation, deliberation, to determine a path forward. But I wanted to thank everybody, if you're here in the room or otherwise, and you hear about this, for the very thoughtful consideration you gave to this topic. This wasn't a case of people just writing quick letters saying yay or nay. There's a lot of articulation of perspective, which I think we're going to have to seriously consider. And it's a challenge because there was quite a split view on this topic, yet in a way, that's exactly the kind of feedback we now need to reflect on and see where we can arrive at. On the environmental front, you'll hear so much more about that, but at the highest level, we at CSA have been working very extensively to assess what would be the right approach on climate-related disclosure in Canada. We're not working in a vacuum. You probably know we put out a proposal, 51107, I dare say maybe 2 years ago, if it's that long, but that indicated a perspective we had on what we should do in Canada. It became apparent, we got a lot of comments on that, it became apparent that other jurisdictions internationally were extremely active in the space as well, including at the time the US and Europe. And in light of that, one of the key things we heard from our stakeholders was that they didn't think it was going to be accretive if we in Canada mandated a particular approach only to have it differentiated internationally. There was one resounding view that we got, which was that we would want to see a uniform standard so you could ideally compare issuers on a global basis as opposed to just putting in another framework or standard to comply with. So in light of that, we kind of stood down and had monitored very carefully what's happening in the US and in Europe, and we're very much still engaged in that process, and you'll hear a lot more about what's happening in Canada in that regard. But at the highest level, what's coming down the pike, we believe, is that the Canadian Sustainability Standards Board is now going to have to look at what to do in Canada in light of their parent, if you like, view that we should adhere to standards set out by the International Sustainability Standards Board. So we're going to have the CSSB do their work, and then we at the CSA are going to have to do our work to assess that and determine what we think should be applicable to Canadian issuers. All along, if there's been one theme that we have been articulating at the CSA, is that whatever the standard is globally, it must be appropriately measured and tapered to the needs of the Canadian marketplace. And that's exactly what we're stress testing now through these processes. We use the words proportionality and scalability to ensure that what's being asked for meets this test that Grant talked about, cost benefit. And on the whole, we believe we should be bringing this international standard to Canada. It's just for us making sure it's fit for purpose and right-sized. And that's a real process that you'll hear more about later on today. I'd like to now move to an area that Brenda, you alluded to, but Grant, there are a lot of topics that I'm just going to lump together here and see if you could walk us through in a Coles Note way. The whole crypto space. We hear a lot about concerns about short selling. We're trying to move to a T+1 settlement process. And also you alluded to complaint handling for retail investors. Are you able to walk us through that in an efficient way? Because I know you're heavily involved.
So yeah, the short version on some of these. On crypto, you know, we had the notable experience. It wasn't the first international failure, but we had the Quadriga CX experience where, you know, at the time, Canadian investors, you know, lost well over $100 million. And it really forced us to grapple with the jurisdiction that we could exercise in this area. And between 2017 and the present, we've issued, you know, 15 notices, either predominantly the CSA and a couple on Ontario notices. And they addressing everything from tokenization to the status of crypto asset trading platforms, how we were going to address large foreign entities that had got up and running and with a very high level of Canadian investor interest and adoption without entering the regulatory system. So we had to, decide what approach to take with that, and ultimately we are utilizing pre-registration undertakings that are specified in our notices and that have the core responsibilities and attributes that come from securities regulation. I think fundamentally we've come to the view that the principles of securities regulation apply quite well to the crypto asset world. They have to be adapted in detail because the technology is different, but the needs for investor protection, the needs for safe and reliable custody, to make sure the assets are there when the investor wants to withdraw them from a platform. The possible systemic issues that can arise as crypto gets bigger, the integrity of the management and leadership of crypto firms. So all of our approaches are based on the principles of securities regulation, but adapt to the technology and circumstances that we see, including market failures like FTX. Most recently, we published our interim approach to value referenced crypto assets. I hope everyone will adopt the VRCA name rather than stable coins, which is more of a marketing statement than a reality. So VRCA's, we're quite concerned about their status, that there are adequate reserves, that there's transparency about the backing of the VRCA issuers. And we've set out a framework that we expect people to comply with by the end of this year, or to begin to wind up their VRCA activities in Canada. That again is founded in the belief that you have essentially public companies that should be subject to public company regulation that are making a promise that they're behaving like money market funds or bank deposits, and they need to be regulated accordingly. So that's where I feel we are on crypto. On OBSI, it's a top priority. We're planning to publish something soon. When I say OBSI, it's really a framework for dispute resolution providers. And OBSI is the one that's been mandated by the CSA by regulation to date. And the problem has been that even though refusals, to step back, it's essentially a name and shame regime at present, so that if investors go through their investment dealers' complaint handling processes, internal processes, and then the complaint is, at the conclusion of that, is lodged with OBSI, the Ombudsman for Banking and Investment Services, they don't have the power to issue a conclusive decision. The investor can get very worn down. And the dynamic over time is that name and shame, where the only consequence was a publication by OBSI that a firm didn't comply with a recommendation, frankly, people have become a little more shameless. So it doesn't have the impact that it used to have. So we're going to be publishing as a CSA a framework that'll provide for a final conclusive statement by OBSI or a dispute resolution provider. And the governance will, for that process, will have to change too. It'll become a little bit more like an SRO. And as Stan alluded to, we have considerable recent experience in MOUs and design features in relation to modern self-regulatory organizations. So that will become relevant in how we oversee OBSI, and that'll become subject to this conversation with the public. People shouldn't be too fearful about it. The average claim at OBSI is like under $10,000, and the aggregate claims are not very substantial. So it's not, I don't think it's threatening. I think it'll actually enhance confidence as Brenda was alluding to, the same type of confidence that the client-focused reforms are aimed at. On T+1, we're moving forward towards that on the Memorial Day weekend in the United States, actually. Next year, we're working closely with the CCMA in Canada to do everything that's necessary to accomplish it. It's a big lift for the industry, and I don't want to overstate the CSA's role in it. We're performing a coordinating role. We're taking the regulatory actions that are needed. We're engaging with industry and market utilities to make sure that everyone is ready and have done the testing, and that this can be reliably performed. So I think we're moving very effectively in that regard, and as is the TMX, the other exchanges, CDS, and all the dealer community that's well aware of this deadline. Unfortunately, it's occurring over an American long weekend that isn't also a Canadian long weekend next year, and we wish we had that extra testing day. But at present, it's scheduled for the end of May next year. So that's probably enough coverage on some of the projects, but I'll end there, and maybe we can take questions later.
Terrific, Grant. Thanks. Maybe just before we go to the questions, we've got several here. Éric, anything more you want to say on total cost reporting? I know you touched on it earlier.
Really, just maybe to highlight the importance of collaboration. Of course, CSA on those total cost reporting enhancement, all the work that was developed were made with a joint project committee involving, and we get sometimes criticism about the CSA being not that agile and trying to move a little faster. And that project was important because it was worked and developed with CCIR, which is the Canadian Council of Insurance Regulators, with CISRO, the Canadian Insurance Services Regulatory Organizations, and CIRO as well. So all the collaboration between those, of course, regulators and organizations allowed CSA to publish a well-balanced enhancement for investors. So I think just wanted to highlight that key example to say that with collaboration and working in a cooperative manner, we could certainly achieve great results. So basically, total cost reporting. And maybe just to add, just to highlight again the importance of collaboration, every policy or rule-making project that the CSA tackles starts with a mandate where other regulators, where different jurisdiction would lead or co-lead that project, bring it to the table to the chief executives, and involving other provincial regulators. So just to illustrate the importance of collaboration within CSA and delivering results as well. So,
thanks for that. So we have gotten several questions here, and in the interest of time, I'm going to let you know what some of these questions were. I actually think they're going to be better addressed in subsequent panels, so I'm going to give those panels a heads up that I think you're better able to actually tackle these. And then there's one that I'd very much like to do a round table on for all of us. But the first one was, can you talk about the amount of fines issued by provincial regulators and the amount of fines collected? And can you benchmark it to other countries? So we could handle that on this panel, but my ask will be that there will be a panel later on, and our Director of Enforcement, I think, would be able to give you a better perspective on that topic. We could do it, but my preference would be to park it there so you get more of the subject matter expert perspective on that one. Similarly, another question that came in was on the area of sustainability, and we have a complete panel devoted to that topic. And the question was, sustainability disclosures are advancing, but do you expect to see mandatory transition plan disclosures in due course? And there's a reference to the UK Transition Plan Task Force. So I'm hoping that perhaps that panel on sustainability could take that away as something to think about and address at that panel. But the one question I really would like to close on is short snappers, and I'll give everyone 1 minute. This is off the cuff. What's the greatest challenge you face at the CSA or as a CSA? So 1 minute, Grant, what do you say?
Sorry, the short, can you say it?
Yeah, what is the greatest challenge you face as a CSA?
The greatest challenge is the greatest strength, and that's the diversity of opinion and the ability to, really come to consensus when there are strong views in the room. I think we do it well, but the strength is also the challenge, and it's inherent in the structure. Oh, and if you'll let me also, I know there might be interest in the room on short selling, which I didn't cover, but just in a nutshell, we're looking at, with Zero, the possibility of strengthening locate requirements and mandatory buy-in. I'll just leave it at that. But since you had asked about short selling, I didn't want it to go unaddressed.
Thanks, Grant. Appreciate the thoroughness. Brenda.
I think one of the greatest challenges facing securities regulators, and the CSA is no exception, is the rapid pace of change that's happening in the marketplace. And I think it's largely driven by technology and innovation. And that is an area that's really, really exciting. And I think it's an area where market participants are going to continue to innovate. At the same time, with all of this innovation, and it's moving so fast, and we all know it. We've all got kids, we've all got phones, and they're pushing out the next operating system on Apple that does a million different things. We have to take all of that together and figure out, what does this mean for risk to the marketplace? What does it mean for risk to investors? And I think that's going to be one of the greatest challenges facing regulators around the world. And I think we're well served in Canada because we do have a great, strong system, as we've talked about today, to be able to put our arms, try and get our arms around those issues and develop what you call intelligent regulation, the theme of your conference here. Develop intelligent regulation to address those issues.
Thanks, Brenda. Éric?
I think it goes with what Brenda was saying, is the fast pace of the changes, the technology changes that comes up, is to be able to keep up and always to stay up front, so to have to keep our expertise, because our teams, our staff has a lot of expertise, but to keep that up, to follow the market, to keep having a good lecture of or a good visibility of the challenges that affect the Canadian capital markets, and in order to be there, to be coherent and to be pertinent as a security regulator, CSA-wise. So I think we need to keep that up, to favor that innovation, but also being able to prioritize and to see what is a priority for our markets, and keeping that fast pace going with our staff and with our approach.
So maybe to close it out then, I'm hearing the importance of collaboration, notwithstanding the difficulties, innovation and fast pace of change and how you keep up. I guess my vote would be that, and it goes back to this CSA as a unique institution. In a way, the model we have requires us as responsible regulators to talk through policy and to bring our best to that discussion and table. And through the process of civil discourse, conversation, a realization that what the country really wants is a harmonized rule book. And do we have the fortitude and the perseverance to want to achieve that result or not? I must say, when I look around the world today, I'm very hard-pressed to find any exemplars that are role models. I don't know about you, but I was asked a question similarly at a conference I spoke at last week, what keeps you up at night? And based on what we're seeing geopolitically in the world, there's no discourse. There's polarization, my way or the highway. And we have the opportunity, I'd suggest it's a burden, but I actually think it's a privilege as responsible regulators to talk things through so that we can actually position Canada for huge success globally. It's a unique institution, it's highly criticized, but I actually think when you peel the onion, it's probably one of the best institutions we now have in the country. Those are my closing thoughts. I thank you very much for listening and to our panelists for participating. So thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.